Michael, what the EF? Michael Woods, North America's best bike racer, was left off the Tour de France team by EF Pro Cycling.
Yeah, Ian, it is a bit of a shock to all of us over in this continent. I wouldn't say that he's North America's best cyclist. We have a lot of good cyclists, but as far as Grand Tour potential goes, doesn't get much better than Mike Woods for North America.
Yeah, I mean, he's a bronze medalist at the World Championship. He won that stunning, emotional stage at the Vuelta a España. You know, Mike knew that this was potentially coming, that he would maybe be on the fence for the Tour de France. He mentioned this to us when we talked to him during the coronavirus break. Let's take a look at that interview and hear what Mike had to say about potentially being left off the Tour team or what he needed to do to make the Tour de France team for EF.
I could see the team not throwing me in there just because there's so many other factors at play. We've got three GC guys that are going really well. Like I said, it's a Rubik's Cube. It's going to be really tough to figure out how those guys insert how I fit in with that role as well. And whether my form is going to be there. I'm confident it'll be there. My best week is always that third week of a Grand Tour. I always have the most successes. If I'm healthy, I'm always going well there. And so I think that's the big pitch that I have to make to the team, prove that I can be in form and riding well enough that they believe in me and believe that I'll be at that place where I can be killing it in that third week of a Grand Tour.
So Mike Woods knew that it wasn't a surefire thing, but his argument essentially was that he was going to be reliably very good, if not at the beginning of the Tour de France, at least by the end, and that would set him up for, if nothing else, a very good Ardennes campaign. I think that one of the problems with this is, though, there are no training races. Mike Woods, he can't go to the Tour de France saying, okay, this is going to be a form builder. This is, the most important thing any year in cycling, but in 2020, the Tour de France is huge. You can't go in if you're a little soft. And what EF has is they have Danny Martinez, who just won the Criterium du Dauphiné. They have Rigoberto Urán, who's been second at the Tour, and they have Sergio Higuita. I'm still a bit confused, though, because I think that Mike Woods is just such a reliably strong asset for the team. And why not just take one more guy who you know is going to be good, who you know is going to be useful, whether he's riding for yellow or not in the third week? We don't know, but Rigoberto Urán, sometimes he's amazing, sometimes he's not. I think that EF keeps putting their faith in him, and they need more options now more than ever in this abridged season.
Yeah, let's keep in mind Woods rode his first Tour de France in 2019, a really up and down affair for him. He had a couple crashes that set him back, broken rib early, but he was very good in that final week of the Tour de France, riding the breakaways, and was in that winning break on stage 20 with Vincenzo Nibali. So almost there, and we saw him displaying similar form early this season. Of course, he had that win on Mont Ventoux in the virtual Tour de France, really just smashing everyone up that climb. And then at Lombardia, which was a big goal for him, a race that he really loves. He didn't have the form or the ride that he wanted, but as the selection was being made on the Muro di Sormano, he was just off the back of that lead group riding with Mathieu van der Poel. So we can say for sure that Woods was on his way up, and he ostensibly would have been there by the third week of the Tour de France. And you got to keep in mind as well that where does this leave Woods now for Liège-Bastogne-Liège, Amstel Gold, Flèche Wallonne, competing against all these other Tour de France riders who will have a Grand Tour in their legs coming into the Ardennes Classics. It's going to be very hard for him to get to the level, to get the racing that he needs. The other big component of this is Woods' transfer to Israel's startup nation. You have to wonder if that is something that factored into him being left off the Tour de France team by EF.
Well, that is, I think, a very good point. Chris Froome is also going to Israel Startup Nation, and there was all this talk in Team Ineos if, okay, Froome is leaving the team, maybe they don't want to even take him to the Tour de France because of that. But Mike Wood said that his reason for going to Israel Startup Nation was really spurred on by this non-selection at the EF team.
The other thing to consider when you have a rider of Mike Woods' caliber, one of the best climbers in the world, a rider like that really needs to be assured big race starts, before the season even starts. Yes, Mike Woods was coming back from his broken leg at Paris-Nice, but if he's healthy and ready to compete, and he says he wants to be at the Tour de France, put him at the Tour de France. It's not like EF has a roster of, 15 guys that are vying for the spot. There's only so many riders that are at a level similar to Woods that potentially deserve a spot as a climber on the Tour de France team. It's not like EF is having to split their roster between GC ambitions and a sprinter. Ostensibly, they're going for a middling GC place and stage wins. So that is a role that Woods fits into perfectly. And when you put riders in the position of having to fight for a spot on the Tour de France team when they've already proven themselves to be one of the world's best riders, it leaves a poor taste in their mouth. And you can see why Woods would be interested in going to a team where he was going to get more support, a bit more loyalty. Our colleague Alex Dita did talk to the Canadian national team director, Kevin Field, about Woods being left off the team. He has a scoop. Let's hear from him and look forward to seeing Woods at the Giro d'Italia, I guess.
Looks like he's not going to be riding the Tour de France in 2020 for EF. What are your thoughts on that?
So, I was really surprised, really, really surprised. And, those kinds of selections, having been not at that World Tour level, but working as a sports director in teams for numerous years, you understand, the challenges of making some of those selections, and it's easy, optically from the outside to, say this, that, or the other thing, and things may not make sense from the outside. So I appreciate that there's definitely some internal considerations that everybody may not be aware of. Well, at the same time, as a fan and a friend and a supporter of Mike, you're definitely a little bit disappointed. And you understand, that when you're trying to select and build a team for a race like the Tour de France, or for any race at that level, it really is about creating the best balance within the team to meet the goals and the expectations that the team has. Sure. And that all makes sense, and that will be the rationale for any type of selection. But it's still, you still kind of look at it and you want to scratch your head a tiny bit and say, it makes sense, I understand what they would be thinking and how they would be going about that selection. And where they want to go, especially with some of their rising stars like Martinez and Higuita. Those guys are uber talented and going big places. But you still are left a tiny bit confused from the outside, and trying to struggle with understanding how did Mike not fit into those plans, given where the level that he's risen to in this sport and the contribution that he could make to that team and his skill set as an athlete, and how he could actually be, either one of two things or three things, even for the team in that situation, super strong support for their designated leaders in the areas where they're going to need assistance and help, a bit of a plan B or a backup to what their ultimate objective could be. And then that wild card chance to, he's a guy who can, in those, again, those very situational and specific scenarios in a race where you need to do something that puts your opponents in a situation where they need to make a difficult decision. He is that tactical joker, that wild card that can be an amazing player for whatever their objectives could have been. And you really, I'd love to call up JV or Charlie or Andreas or one of the sports directors and just get a little bit more of the inside scoop. What was really going on? Because from the outside you just look at it and you're like, yeah, I get it, and then I don't. So definitely a bit of confusion and definitely a bit of Canadian disappointment, because it would have been awesome to see Mike supporting his team in any capacity or role in the Tour de France.